Um, I I hit a blank wall, a professional wall, in about the year 2000. I reached a point where I said simply to myself, I cannot do this anymore. I started life as a filmmaker. That evolved into internal communication in organizations and organizational development and change. In our work, especially in filmmaking, but actually right throughout that work, we were working with large organizations, institutions, all the pharma, airlines, energy, government, you name it, the kinds of companies that buy and need those services. And in our filmmaking and communication work, we won a ton of awards around the world, and we were really good at it, and I absolutely loved it. Dream job, always wanted to do it. And as we got closer to the inner workings of organizations, we started to have questions about what was really going on in there. And at the same time as that, we were doing some reading, completely separate from work, but we were doing some reading about issues which are now absolutely not only mainstream, but they are headlines. But at the time, and I'm talking about the mid-90s, nobody was talking about these issues. Nobody. And those issues are climate change, biodiversity loss, species depletion, radical inequality, just the plethora of issues, which at the time I didn't really understand how they connected, but I knew they connected to the work that I was doing. I knew that I was doing this work inside organizations and they had something to do with these issues, but it was absolutely impossible to talk about these issues inside these organizations. And even today, it is not possible in many and probably most cases to talk about these issues in the way they need to be spoken about inside these organizations. And at a certain point, something happened and I said, that's it. I can't do this anymore. And I just stopped. So I've always been self-supporting. I've been working for myself since I was 25 years old, and that's not yesterday. And I stopped and took an accidental sabbatical. And accidental because I found a master's in responsibility and business practice at the University of Bath, which is a radical kind of left of field master's program, which was situated inside the Centre for Action Research and supported by Anita Roddick and the Body Shop. And really it was about trying to investigate the mindset of people who are running businesses. And I left that master's with a couple of things, actually lots of things, but the key things that I left with were this. I left believing that my work, more than anything else, is how I contribute to the world. I could become a vegan, I could fly less or not fly at all. I could, when I could afford a car again, get an electric car. I could do all those things, but actually it was my work that shaped the world. I had my research question in my master's was, why don't we act? Why don't we act in response to these issues? And I looked at the relationship between business, politics, and the media, the dysfunctional relationship between those three domains and why they are leading us to a knife edge. And I went to the very top in those institutions to talk to people who run them. And I came away knowing that the people who ran them knew less than I did about these issues and felt just as powerless as I do in relation to them. What struck me most of all, and what strikes me still today, is the gap between what people were prepared to say off the record and what they were willing to say on the record. That gap, that silence between what people understood, absolutely understood, and what they could not say. And the last thing I left with, which was to change my life, was that nature holds the key. Nature holds the key to everything that we need to do. And I left not knowing at all what to do, but just with a resolve, I am not going back to be part of the problem. I am not going to use my work to be part of the problem. And somehow nature is the solution. And we called the years that followed the wilderness years because we had no idea what to do then. It wasn't obvious. And we went completely broke. We refused to go back to that work. And I remember one Christmas, I had 97 cents in my bank account and we had a debt the size of a small house. Well, actually not that small house. And we still couldn't go back, wouldn't go back. And all we did was what we could do. We were talking to people, and we discovered that actually there's a huge marketplace in business for people who will tell people what they want to hear. And there is a vanishing small marketplace for people who are willing to hear the inconvenient truth. And to work with people who were willing to hear that truth and who wanted to do things in new ways. And some of those people are on this call today, actually. It's lovely to see you after all these years. And they gave us a chance to become different kinds of practitioners, to bring the rules of nature, the principles of living systems into the work that we were doing with people and organizations. And I'm in a conversation today about being braver and bolder, because I absolutely believe that it is because we are pursuing business as usual that we are actually going to take our entire living system over the edge into an abyss. That if we cannot find a way to work the way life works and to understand that nature has certain rules and we must abide by them, then we are not going to address our problems. And that's why I'm in this conversation, because we need to radically overhaul business as usual and work in new ways. So that's why I'm here. I want to start with COP26 and Antonio Guterres. There was a report that came out before COP26 in Glasgow, the top line of which, this is a code red for humanity. He opened the COP with a speech in which he said, "We are digging our own graves." And just the other day, the recent report came from the IPCC, which was called a damning indictment of our failed climate leadership. Now, these are not the words that are normally used by diplomats, but these are the words that are being used now. We began talking about these issues in Stockholm in 1972. And 50 years later, we have a climate and biodiversity crisis that is worse than when these talks began. And my provocation, and this is a provocation, is to ask this question: what if our approach to the crisis is actually part of the crisis? Here's what I believe. I believe that we have broken the entire system because we don't know how it works. I believe that we're failing to address the crisis for that reason too. We don't know how it works and we don't know how it changes. I believe that we have been educated to within an inch of ignorance, and we have built that ignorance into everything. And I'm going to spend the rest of the time speaking with you, explaining what I mean by all of that. We are living inside the wrong story. We are living inside a view of the world which is based on Newtonian physics, which is about 450 years old. And that physics has long since been superseded. We know a very different view of the world now. But that view of the world, the idea is that we live inside a machine. So Newton built an idea of the world which was mechanistic, that it's like a machine, it's totally predictable, it's knowable and manageable, that if you can figure out how the machine works, you can operate it, you can manage it, you can control it, and you can take it to a place of your own desire. That was the beauty, that was the attraction of Newton's physics. And we have built that story into everything that we do, all of our lives, all of our professional lives, all of our institutions pretty much are built on that story. But it's the wrong story, because actually what we have discovered is that the world doesn't work that way at all. What we're actually living inside is a living system, not a machine. It's a living system that works in a completely different way. It couldn't be more different. It is self-organizing, it is emergent, it is interdependent, it is non-linear, it is not predictable, it is not controllable, and it is not manageable in the ways that we have believed it to be. Far from being cogs on a machine, we are participants in a living system, and that system is evolving through us. So we are part of an evolutionary process. And the part that we play in the evolutionary process is the decisions that we make. So evolution is a process that we guide through our decision making. So my provocation is that we need a new story. And that story is the story of nature, of life, of living systems. And it is all around us if we are willing to look. It's right there, a classroom willing for us to learn. So when we talk about thinking in systems or thinking systemically, thinking like living systems, what does it mean? What it actually means at its simplest is thinking about how things work together. If our story of the machine broke things up, systems thinking asks us to think about wholes. It asks us to think about the relationships between things. So a couple of really brief ideas about living systems. Living systems make themselves. They are self-making, and they make themselves as a parts of the system enter into a relationship with each other. So the flower makes the bee, and the bee makes the flower. They are completely interdependent. And as they go about their business, each dependent on the other, in the process, they make the meadow. They and all the other species in the meadow behave in exactly that same way. So the parts of the system make themselves, and they make the larger system as they engage with each other. So living systems are self-generating networks of relationship that produce life. That's the outcome of living systems. Life is the emergent result of the systems of relationship. So what can that teach us? That's very, really quick statement, which we can work with that. What can that teach us? If that's true, what can it teach us about our role and our purpose in the world now? Well, these two views of the world are fundamentally different. This hierarchical, controlled, managerial view of the world versus a networked, interdependent, emergent world are two really very different views of the world. If you have a view of the world that is mechanistic, that's hierarchical, you will look at the problems that we have and you will say, it's somebody else's job to solve that problem. But if you understand yourself as a participant in a network, in a world that's emerging, you will understand that it's everybody's job and it's my job. So if we look at the world through the lens of living system, our purpose looks entirely different. Our purpose now is to use our work to regenerate the human and social and natural systems that we have broken because we didn't understand how they worked. And the challenge out of that are these questions. We have to ask ourselves, how is my work part of the problem? Because it is. There isn't a single person here that's outside the system. We are all inside the system. We all make it, we all break it, and we can all heal it. And so the other question is, how can my work become part of the solution? And what can living systems teach us about organizing? Well, let's use a mechanical system to make it clear. This is a picture of a car, or rather, it's all of the parts of a car. And the point about this image is that until the parts are put together and in exactly the right way, that car is going nowhere. So if you like, all of the parts of that system are the potential of a car. Until they are put into relationship with each other, they don't have the capacity of a car. So relationships are all about capacity. Building relationships is about building capacity, the capacity to do things. And in living systems, they are smarter together. The more connected up a system is, the smarter it is. The more disaggregated it is, and we know that from working in institutions, the more stupid it is. So stupid systems are broken up systems, and smart systems are connected up systems. And that asks us to think about organizations differently. If you start looking at organizations through the lens of living systems, you realize that an organization isn't a place or a thing, though we refer to that in our language all the time. Actually, at a deeper, more fundamental level, an organization is a pattern of relationship that we enact and we embody. And if we want to change things, then we have to disturb the social architecture that keeps things the same. We have to disturb the social architecture, because all an organization is patterns and routines of behavior that we just keep on doing, which keeps on keeping on, and we must disturb it. We have to start moving away from seeing stovepipes and silos and begin to observe networks of possibility, to see the potential of connecting things up that are currently disaggregated. The challenge there is disturbance. Disturbance is a beautiful word to me. It is a beautiful word because it is the key to all change. If we aren't willing to disturb and to be disturbed, then nothing new is possible. So we have to disturb the social architecture that keeps things the same, all the habits and routines that keep the system going. And what can it teach, these ideas teach us about leading? Well, we think that the smart parts are at the top. We believe that. We act as if that's true. We hire them, we pay them more. We expect them to be in charge. We expect them to solve all the problems. And when we don't, we kick them out, or they kick themselves out. They resign because they're not able to control the system. And of course, that's not how it works. In fact, the intelligence in every living system is in the whole thing. It's in the relationship between things. And that's a very different view of what's actually happening. And if you have that view, you do different things. You see leadership differently. You realize that leadership isn't a position. It's not up there, because there is no up there in a living system. There's just everywhere. And leadership is a way of behaving. It's a way of being. And that can be found anywhere and everywhere. And all you have to do is to think about someone like Greta Thunberg to discover that actually that's true. A child can be a leader. And once you understand leadership in this way, you understand that the job of those in positions of leadership is not to be better engineers controlling machines, but to be better gardeners, to cultivate the conditions in which change can happen, not to make it happen, but to make change possible. And in order to make change possible in complex systems, you need to engage in radical participation. Not just the smart parts at the top, but everybody. The challenge for leaders, and this is from Bill Torbett, is that it's almost impossible for leaders to advance to the later stages of their own growth until they loosen the reins of control and initiate more complex organizing processes. That is the challenge for people in positions of power and leadership, because you've got to loosen control. You have to have the courage to not know the answer to a question you're about to ask. And you've got to engage in more complex organizing, which engages many more people than we're used to engaging. Because if we keep on embodying the past and the problem, then nothing is going to change. And what about change itself? What can living systems teach us about change? Well, this is what we say change looks like: a straight line into the future that we can predict, and there's milestones and goals and targets, and all of this is language that's just endemic in organizations. But actually, if you reflect on what really goes on and your real life, change looks more like that curly, wavy, going all over the place arrow. That's the truth, though we keep on overlaying our reality with this dream of predictability. This is what we do. We plan in this kind of way, in straight lines. And that kind of planning does work, but it works in a steady state world. It works when tomorrow is going to be like today. It cannot work in a world where the future can't be predicted and it can't be controlled, where we do not know the answer to the question. Because that's the point. The future is a question, not an answer. And answering the question is what change is all about. Now, living systems can teach us how to do this because they work in cycles. Living systems work in cycles, they respond to feedback, and they self-correct in response to that feedback. And the systems that respond to changes in their environment survive, and all the others don't. It's really that simple. Almost everything that ever existed on this planet isn't around anymore because it didn't make its way through the evolutionary process. Those species that couldn't learn fast enough in a changing world got left behind. And who knows, we might be one of those species. Once you understand that a living system is making itself moment by moment, then you understand that change is not an initiative that you can plan today and implement some other time. Change happens right here, it happens right now, or it's never going to happen. It's that simple. We do it here, or we do it now, or in this next moment. And everything that we do, all of our work, when you look at it that way, becomes an opportunity to embody the new thing, the change we want to see. So change through the lens of living systems is a non-linear, evolving system of relationships between ideas, people, and events. All you have to do to know that this is true is to look at what's happening at the moment in the Ukraine. It isn't just about the Security Council. What's happening in Ukraine is now being determined by the people on the ground. It's being determined by President Zelensky and the stance that he's taken. It's being determined by the Russian soldiers, the ones who choose to get out of their tanks and walk back to Russia. It's being determined by the people who walked out of the Security Council when the Russian delegate was speaking. All of these things are necessary to stop the war in the Ukraine. Not just one part, all of the system is required. And change is a journey. It's not a destination. Where you're going will change as the world around you changes. That's why long-term planning is an exercise in futility, and why people are surrounded by plans that are irrelevant and end up doing work that nobody ever planned. So that asks us to move from linear planning to emergent learning. We have to make 9 to 5 work the subject of our experiment. And as we do this experiment, these new ways of working will become the new structure in the making. We have to learn our way into the future, not plan our way into the future. And the challenge here is that we have to begin. We have to start somewhere. And we have to begin without knowing, and to see knowing, not knowing as a virtue, not a problem. If we can prioritize learning, we have to be willing to learn something new. And we also have to be willing to risk something important. Playing around at the edges of things at this moment of emergency is not going to do it. We have to put something major in play. So what now? Well, my provocation is this. We need an executive rebellion. We need to be braver and bolder at work. We need to break our silence at work where we impact the world. We need to commit ourselves to the work of regeneration and renewal. And we have to commit ourselves to learning to work the way life works. And where we do that is at any level of scale. Pick your domain. It can be personal, in our organizations, professional networks, I think have huge possibilities, entire industries, regions. We can do this work anywhere we have influence. We have to become whole systems changing whole systems. These are just random examples of what's already happening. In France, Carrefour has put the transformation of the food system at the heart of its strategy, which is called Act for Food. Around the world, when mayors saw that nations were not stepping up to the plate in relation to these issues, mayors working at city level began a global parliament, and they meet to share learning. The city of Amsterdam is the first city in the world to take new economics, Kate Raworth's donut economics, and put it at the heart of city planning to turn it into a smart city. We have business declares a climate and biodiversity emergency happening throughout all kinds of professions and all kinds of initiatives, like in the Advertised Emissions Initiative. There's lots to say about that, or Fashion Revolution. Karen Finn is at part of that, a whole network of people around the world reimagining how our clothes are made from throughout the entire supply chain. Whole systems, changing whole systems means connecting systems, cultivating relationships, experimenting and prototyping, and learning. That's what it means to be whole systems engaged, changing whole systems. And I will end this provocation, this piece, with this. It's a supreme irony that in search of control and certainty, we have created an uncertain world. We are at a cultural crossroads. We can keep faith with business as usual and those ways of working which have failed. Or we can finally align ourselves with the living world and dedicate our work to making life on Earth viable once more. So here endeth the provocation. And what I'd like you to do now, if you would, is to take out your pen and your paper and spend a couple of minutes journaling on this question. When I hear this provocation, what strikes me is, when I hear this provocation, what strikes me is, I'm wary of the Galileo effect and the consequences of telling the truth. I'm confused. I'm looking for a focus in my many engagements, empowerment to get bolder, but also devastated by the crises in our lives, the many crises in our lives. I'm making what connects meaningful. I'm inspired to become a leader driving the cultural change required to make sustainability central to Dell Technologies' work. I need to challenge myself more. I'm overwhelmed by the size of the task. I see that there's a huge opportunity to take action now to make some positive impact. I'm still trying to understand the true nature of my own agency and the difference between trying to change the world and live in service to the whole of the whole. I'm struck again by the simple power there is in a group of people talking together to make kin talk and to not know. I'm mad as hell.